Welcome to Tech Tuesday, number 59. And today we're going to talk about IP on day zero. First, we're going to take a moment because we're still waiting for 50 hostages to get back home. Okay, so where do you start with IP? Now, imagine that you're a founder and you have some new idea, a vision, or whatever it might be. And you realize that IP is really important because you heard this lecture, perhaps. So, first observation is that you're part of the minority. But after we get past that, what is the next thing you do? Should you file a patent, make a list of your trade secrets? Maybe you should do a search. Maybe you should start preparing and signing NDAs. So, no, that's going to happen, but not on day zero. What you should be doing on day zero is assessing your IP situation. And more important, as a founder, you should start understanding the part of your story which has to do with IP. So, what we're not going to talk about, even though it's important, is these early meetings where you start talking about what should be in your first patent and what information is necessary and more lab results and so on. But we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about everything else. The first thing we're going to ask is, we have a new venture. Who are your new venture? And venture and the founder, kind of work together. The first thing to realize is that each new initiative has its own DNA, its own problems, its own issues. And let me give you an example. In your initiative, do you understand the problem you're trying to solve? The answer sometimes yes, sometimes no. Do you have a handle on the solution? Do you think you know where you're going? The answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. Does the market exist? There's ventures which go into an existing market and ventures which go into a new market. And the answer again is sometimes yes, sometimes no. But if it does exist, do you know what your market is? Do you really understand it? And the answer is usually no. Let me give you a few examples of different types of ventures which have different IP issues and different things you want to do on day zero. If you have a company and you're working on product market fit, what it really means is that you probably know what the solution looks like, and you probably know somehow what the market looks like, and you know that your solution and market have to somehow overlap, and then you have product market fit. Sometimes it's the other way around. You discover a very interesting or important problem, and maybe you have a handle on what the solution looks like, but you don't know anything about the market. I mean, you know how to turn water into gasoline, but you have no idea what the market looks like. In another example, you have a vision of what the world should look like when you're done, but you don't know the problems, you don't know the solutions, you don't know anything about the market. One more example, deep tech. You build a quantum computer. Okay, you manage to make mice live for 10 years. Okay, all of your energy is into that problem solution. What does a venture look like? What is the business aspect of it? How do you make money? You're not there yet. but you are when you come to meet your patent attorney. Patent, IP more generally, is a supportive function. So it needs to support your company, your vision, your goals, and goals can be long-term and they can be short-term. A classic goal for new venture is investors. So if you know what the investors are like and you know what they want, obviously, perhaps we can start talking about making sure that you're aware of the IP issues they have and you can start solving them. Maybe it's actually not a completely new venture, it's an existing company with a new product. So your problems might be, how can I get leverage? Because the company has big products. And how can I convince other people that there's value to what I'm doing? Again, IP can help with that. What if you want to take over the world? And there's like two main ways of doing it. Well, more than two. One is you solved something and you use it to take over the world. Okay, if I'm the only one with generative AI, I can take over the world. But sometimes my solution is only a stepping stone. Okay, first I have automated taxi systems, and then I get rid of the taxi drivers and make taxis which drive themselves. Okay, so I have a two-step solution. Maybe your goal is having a quick exit. So there's all these different goals you might have, and IP should support them, and the emphasis is on different. And of course, you should be aware that what you want and what the investors want are not the same thing. And we'll say a bit more later. Let me give you a typical day zero situation, which happens that I meet these quite often. So let's say there's a recognized problem, which is weeding lawns. Today you put chemicals and it kills the weeds. Now you think you can solve it. In particular, since you spent 5 years learning robotics, you think that a robot that uses AI and image processing can identify weeds, and then it can take a little hot probe and touch the weed and cook it. Okay, so that's day zero. That's all you have, and you're smart enough to come to your patent attorney, and you know that you're going to need investors soon. Right now, you need seed money, and you hope to have a proof of concept, let's say, in 9 months, and then you're going to want to raise more money. So here's some things that I expect about the future, which affect how I think IP should be done for this typical situation. The first thing I expect is the market of weeding lawns is not well defined, and you're going to understand what it is in great detail. Another thing I expect is that you will pivot maybe a little bit, maybe a lot, but the end product is probably not going to look like this. I expect that your investors and your partners will try to guide you to do something that they want rather than something that you want. I think you'll discover that it's not so easy to solve this problem. And in fact, there are more problems, and you will discover them. I think that even though you're not aware of any competition, you either have it or will have it. And I think that even though you don't have it now, because you're so excited about the idea, you're definitely going to figure out a business plan, which includes, how to make money, how to do sales, how to grow. These things I expect to happen about the future. And as you know, IP is supportive. IP is also predictive. So we want to start predicting what you're going to need and make sure that we're dealing with that as soon as possible. I call these the big three because most investors, when they have a checklist, an IP, they have the equivalent of these three questions. One, do you own the IP? Two, does the IP cover the product? And it doesn't matter what cover means, but there's some relationship between the IP and the product. And if there's no product, maybe it's at least some basic technologies that you expect to have in the product. And last but not least, do you have freedom to operate? They don't want to invest money and then somebody else takes it. Now, most investors don't ask at an early stage, but maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. How will your IP help us, the investors, make a good return on money? How will your IP be used for leverage or for getting a monopoly? Now, day zero is the day that you should start preparing for your due diligence. You should have a due diligence file with all sorts of information in it. You start collecting information like contracts, NDAs, trade of assignment to show who owns the IP. That happens now. Well, you might be thinking to yourself that it's really cool that Mayer says that he knows what investors want. But actually, it's a founder who needs to know what his particular and actual investors are going to want. And investors are very different. First of all, each one has their own, I called it pet peeve, some people call it craziness. Each investor has a different vision on what the world should look like. They have different plans, what the company should be doing, and also for themselves, when they should be getting money. Each one of them understands what you're doing in a different way. Each one has a different perspective and appetite for risk. Different investors have different, I call it attention to IP. How much do they care about IP at the stage they're talking to you? And of course, different investors have different time horizons. Is it 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be? So the investors are not the same. And therefore, the IP issues which you have to explain to them are not the same. And even though some people say you can't, other people say you can figure out who your natural investors are. Not who will definitely invest in your company, but what are the properties of the investors who might be interested in your company? And if you can't figure out who they are, so you should go out and talk to investors to figure out who they are. And if you can figure out who they are, you should also go out and talk to your investors and figure out what bothers them and what's interesting for them, because that's what we're trying to do, is build a package that they feel comfortable investing in and make a good return on the money. Talked about 3 questions. Now, one slide in more detail on each one. When I say, do you own your IP, what it really means, do you own the IPs that you need? That means the IPs that you have now, probably nothing. The IP you plan on using, maybe you're not aware of what you need. The IP you plan on creating. The IP you plan that other people will create for you. Maybe your workers, maybe your subcontractors, maybe some third party. All of this goes around the question of, do you know what IP you actually need in order to move your venture forward? That's a question for day zero. And of course, IP is not just patents, it's trade secrets, trademarks, confidential information, data, and perhaps all sorts of other documents you may have signed which gave away rights like NDAs or non-compete agreements and so on. Even on day zero, you could have a lien, a forced license, or other obligations. You took money from some grant authority, and in return for taking the money, you must give a license to anybody who asks for it. You might not be aware, but it's an important IP issue. And not exactly a question of ownership, but founders and inventors can have a personal responsibility. Maybe the employer, whether contractual or by law, depending on where they live, you might be forced to file your patent in one country or another. Same thing with the nationality. Type of technology. If it's a military technology, it also limits what you can do. Overall, if I had to summarize it, it means that you think about where and how new IP will be generated, and already at day zero saying, here's how we know that IP will be safe, ours. The second question, does your IP cover your product? The two typical issues, what we find on day zero are you don't have a product and you don't have IP. So maybe we'll ask the question differently. What might your product look like? Meaning, what do you think you're going to pitch to investors? And what IP do you expect to obtain or try to obtain? And how is that IP relevant? And usually at this stage, the question is, does the IP make any sense whatsoever? The IP you're trying to obtain. Often you do some sort of patentability search and analysis. Why? Because if it's not new, you're not going to get a patent. That affects your IP position. Now let's just be aware of what reality looks like. Your product will change. What IP you will get is unclear. And it's questionable now how your IP will have any value in the future when you need it. That's fine. However, what you can do, and you should do, is start practicing the idea that there should be an alignment between your IP and your product. And if we live in a better world, you would be considering the alignment between your IP and your business, meaning how will this IP or that IP give my venture business value? And the last question, do you have freedom to operate? Now, I hope it's clear that before you have a product, nobody can answer that question. But maybe there's an elephant in the room. You know, one of these companies that owns 453 patents that cover everything that you might imagine wanting to do. And then obviously on day zero, we have to be able to answer the question, how do we avoid being stomped on by one of these big players? Or maybe they are a desired partner. And the question is, how can we partner with them in a way that will have freedom to operate? Sometimes there's a patent out there. It's not unusual that people come to me on day zero and they're already aware of a patent that belongs to what could be a competitor, except that they went bankrupt 4 years ago. And maybe you should buy that patent. Sometimes just by looking at a company, you know, I mean, it also relates to other issues, but you know that people are going to ask you. For example, if you make a search engine, people are going to ask you, are you sure you're not infringing Google's patents? Okay, that's a given. And also regarding patentability, the same issues can raise. Are you able to identify critical features in your product? If you can perhaps do some type of freedom to operate. Some people believe in doing a white space analysis at this stage in order to understand where you have more freedom to develop and where you don't. In general, I think an FTO is premature at this stage, and you should do a more general analysis to understand the risks that you have. Do you want an opinion? Okay, now's the time to ask. If you have an opinion, you have to use it. You have to show it. It can cause problems. It can also be very positive. And last but not least, people expect you to update it. If you show an opinion from 5 years ago on a completely different version of the product, it just shows that you have not updated it. In a best of all possible worlds, now is the time where we start doing an analysis of IP risks, or at least where and why IP can be a problem for you. Okay, not an opportunity, but an actual problem. Hope you notice the starting to sync that I have here several times already. Okay, so these are the basic questions which people will ask, and we talked about them. Wonderful. Let's do more interesting stuff. There's a lot of background information which affects your IP issues. There's an overall context. There's the issues involved. There's some properties of the technology. You have a starting point. The starting point involves resources that you have. It involves what you know how to do, and so on. What do we look at when we're thinking about IP, when we consider all of these background information? We look at where the company is strong. We look at where the company has opportunities. We look at where the company has a weakness. We look at where the company has vulnerabilities. There are other frameworks, but I like this one. And hopefully, after you look at all of these things, you start thinking to yourself, what should my business strategy be moving forward, and how can IP help with that or be a problem? A lot of companies don't actually have a fixed pathway, but rather, if you talk about product market fit, it means you have an exploration strategy. You're trying to figure out where you're going to go and what you're going to do. Well, how can IP help you explore, help you figure out where you should be exploring more, where you should be exploring less? The company structure itself, what people do you have, how do they report to each other, how do they communicate, is affected by these IP issues. Positioning, not going to talk about it today. But how can IP help you position your company in good places? The job to be done of IP in your company. What is the IP supposed to be doing for your company? IP is not for free. It generates a burden. How much burden are you willing to, should you be willing to take upon yourself? And what return on investment should be planning on for IP? Okay, I filed a patent, cost me $10,000. I'm expecting it to add $100,000 to the value of my company. Okay, you should start thinking about it now. But before we think about any of these things, let's talk about your IP person, like me. So IP is a strategic issue, and I think we can assume that all of the options that you're considering for being the IP person are competent. But I think that is not enough. And here's what I think you should be doing when you're thinking about how to choose them. First of all, IP is a journey, and you need a partner for the journey. And what is suitable for you as an inventor might not be suitable for you as a founder. Okay, so you worked with a patent attorney when you were an inventor in some big company. You love that patent attorney. Doesn't mean that patent attorney is good for you when you are coming to them with founder issues. Maybe they are. Don't know. You need to consider it. You need to choose an IP person you can trust. Why? Because probably anybody watching this video does not understand enough about IP in order to judge if that IP person is actually competent and good. You got to trust them. You need an IP person, because IP is strategic, that has a compatible strategic perspective. The types of strategy that you like to think about and you like to do should be matching. Now, matching doesn't mean that they're the same. It could be the opposite. You can say, I'm a free thinker. I need an IP person who only likes square strategies. That's fine, okay? But there's some sort of match between the two. Issue of risk and uncertainty and opportunity safety. Okay, I do something safe, I do something gives me an opportunity. How much risk am I willing to take? How much uncertainty am I willing to tolerate? How much money am I willing to spend on reducing the uncertainty? So IP people are very different in all of these respects, most IP people, from most entrepreneurs. You need to choose one that's compatible. And there's the issue of cost benefit. You tell a patent attorney, a typical patent attorney, let's not file a continuation because I can't see, let's not answer this office action. Let's abandon this case. Let's narrow the claim, even though the examiner's not asking for it. Okay, so there could be good reasons to do it, but most IP people have resistance to doing it. But founders look at it differently. What's the cost? What's the benefit? And last but not least, don't choose an IP person to abdicate decisions to. You have to do it together. If you choose somebody that you feel so comfortable that they're going to make all the decisions for you, might as well just give them the company. That's your IP person. What about the founder? So ventures are super personal. And they're personal because the founder is unique, and they're also personal because the founder is putting all of their energy into it. Think of rock music bands. Each one is different. So what the founder wants matters a lot. And I don't expect answers, but you have to think about this. You have a vision. How far reaching is your vision? 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Um, are you looking for a venture where you work hard or not? We know the answer to that. The company you want to build, is that a kind of company that's great on its own or it's part of an ecosystem? Are you trying to build a company that makes this incredible product? Are you trying to build a company that does all sorts of strategic moves? Do you know where you're going? Do you have one of these moon or bust attitudes? Okay, I was working with a founder and he told me, we're going to run out of money in 4 months unless they get more money. But I already told my investors I'm not going to slow down. Either we make it or we fail. That's fine. What's your attitude? What values do you bring? Remember Google used to be don't be evil? The personality. Do you like talking more or like doing more? Do you look more at the short term or the long term? How greedy are you going to be? Okay. What does that mean? You create value, X, and you want to capture that value. Do you want to capture 90% of X or 10% of X? A lot of innovators have this basic attitude towards IP. Okay. Forget about educating them, but they have an attitude. Is it IP for protection? Is it for transactions? For some other reasons? All of these answers to all of these questions affect what is the best IP for that new venture. Okay, it's not a public company which is supposed to be impersonal. Okay, the founder is very, very important. There's a few other things it's nice to know about the venture. What is the desired impact on the world? Want to make IP to make sure it happens. Do you have any non-standard goals other than money? Because it's not all about the money. Uh, do you know who your partners might be? And in particular, do you have a list? A lot of companies can make a list of their partners or potential clients or whatever. Can you say anything about the timeline in general, or at least when you think products are going to come out, when you're going to make noise? There's important conferences. What moats you have, IP and non-IP, with regard to timing. I need my IP by here. I'm going to have a regulatory mode by here. How do you think you're going to succeed? When are you going to get money? And of course, who's going to manage the company? So that's just, a lot of people have a venture, they have some thoughts about this. In the real world, especially in technology, you have challenges and problems. Often you have some thoughts about what they are and how you plan on dealing with them. I noted non-IP modes. What about the competitive landscape? People that will give you headwinds or tailwinds. What is the climate in the technology market, when the technology is a market? Gen AI is really hot now. Okay? Everybody knows that. Gas-powered cars, a little bit less. Opening a venture is a learning activity. What is your mechanism for learning stuff? We need to make sure that IP will help you learn and any IP matters that interfere with you learning are solved. Often you can identify places where you're going to have to make a decision or where you have alternatives you have to choose between. I say it's nice to know. The more you know, the easier it is to make some sort of initial strategy for the company, which, as you all know, we're going to change just a few months later. Talked about context. So there's generic context and specific context. So I mentioned generative AI, and we can ask, what is the innovation velocity in generative AI? That definitely affects IP issues. But now that's generic. Now let's be specific. What is the innovation velocity in using generative AI for home gardening robots? That's probably different. Here's another example. Everybody knows that there's a lot of uncertainty about obtaining software patents. But for weed whacking robots, it is much less of an issue. So while software patents is important to think about, if you're making a weed whacking robot, it's less important. Go in the opposite direction, toilets. People have always been filing patents on toilets steadily. But now people are filing patents on automatic diagnosis using toilets. That's been going up recently. Why do you need both specific and generic views? Well, first of all, your investors often have some sort of generic prejudice. They like Gen AI, they are scared of software patents. You might want to pivot to a different specific place. Understanding how your venture is not generic helps you understand how your IP issues are not generic and have their particular things to deal with. Now I have a few examples of IP issues and what we might look at. There's not enough time to go through all the different options I talked about, but that's fine. So robots. Robots are easy to copy and they're very technological. So it definitely sounds like patents is the way to go. But if you do the processing in the cloud, well, maybe trade secrets is the way to go. If you plan to win because you're cheap, then do you have one leading innovation which makes you cheaper? If the answer is no, then the return on investment per patent is lower. So either you're going to have less of an IP moat or you're going to have more of an IP budget. Let's say you do have a leading innovation. How do you plan on staying cheapest? Usually, price cutting has a short time horizon, meaning within a few years, everybody else can be cheap as well. So you have to immediately ask yourself, where am I going to get and how good are they going to be for protection-wise? Follow-up innovation. In exactly the same field, what if your business model is renting out the robots? You don't have to mow your lawn every day or kill the weeds every day. Then maybe the big problem is how do you get the robot from one lawn to the next? And maybe you have a unique innovation there. Should probably protect it. So the robots might be a necessary condition for the business. You can't have a weed whacking robot business without a weed whacking robot, but maybe it's not the part that makes the money. Is it too early to talk about a different type of IP, trademarks and branding? In a more general sense, if you have a theory of success and hopefully of failure and challenge, you have a better understanding of what value your IP might have and what types of IP might be relevant for your company. And of course, if you realize that trade secrets are important, you have to put more effort as early as possible in making sure you keep them secret. Company structure, mentioned it before. Where will IP be created? Where will it be used? One of the ecosystem to another. Okay, these are all IP issues, but they affect what company structure you can have. Give you an example. What if the real value is in customer-created weed whacking applications? Weed whacking robots are well known, but specific apps where you say, I kill these weeds, don't kill these weeds, make a nice design, that's where the money is. Is a company able to capture this IP? Is it built around it? Does it have an app store? And do you have the legal framework to make sure you get ownerships and deal with the royalties correctly? And what if the robot can easily be hacked? That's not good for this model. So you need some sort of technology, IP can protect it, to prevent it, but you also need some sort of business and IP frameworks to encourage cooperation. Now, in general, now is the time to start thinking about how IP works with that which is not IP. Just one example. Do you collect usage data? Are you allowed to use it? It's an IP issue, and depending on how your company is built, it's probably good to collect it all through one portal where you have clear rules. What if you believe in having a transparent company? That's great, but are you transparent before you file patents? You have to balance these thoughts. Here's another issue, regulatory matters. Standard essential patents. And I don't remember what FRIEND means, the acronym, but it means that you're fair in giving a license to anybody you ask for a reasonable price. If it's relevant, then some of your IP does not have monopoly value. Make sure that you divide up your IP into critical IP, which is maybe covered by standard essential patents, and other IP which gives you value, which isn't. You definitely want to make sure to have value in trade secrets and data, which, at least in a lot of regulatory situations, are not covered by these SEP rules. What about regulatory approval? Can you use it to block the competition? If you get IP on the solution which meets the regulatory needs, that could be very valuable. What if there's no real regulation, but there's an accepted way of acting? Maybe there are some patents which you must license. We should know it now, on day zero. Again, you're not going to know the answer to all of these questions, but these start you thinking about it. Sometimes the regulation affects the way in which you can make money or the speed of innovation. Or, most interesting, what your competitors look like. You know, some markets, because of the regulatory atmosphere, you have a lot of small players, and some markets you have a small number of big players. When you have a market with a lot of small players, getting two to kick you out of the market is less likely to happen. Much easier for them to take money. So understanding what your overall risk climate is important. Speaking of competitive landscape, are there people in the market? Do they have IP against you? Can you block them from simply moving into your particular niche? Competitors, do they copy one-to-one? It's very easy to get useful IP if your competitors copy one-to-one. What do we do to prevent new competitors? Can we get IP to prevent new competitors? Some markets, what's actually controlling is the ecosystem, suppliers or distributors. Are they controlling using IP? You have to be aware of it. It's an IP issue. If you have a business model, a new way of extracting value, can you get IP to prevent a competitor from copying it? Customer loyalty, very, very important in some markets. Can you use IP to enhance customer loyalty? Last but not least, in the competitive landscape, you need business intelligence. Maybe looking at IP publications can help. Mentioned before, strengths, weakness, vulnerabilities, and opportunities. If you have strengths of any type, we want the IP to maintain it. Now, let's say if you have a competitive advantage, and we want IP to help you leverage it. Okay, let's say what's special about our company is we have unique know-how about weeding. How do we maintain this lead? Weakness, that's specific. For example, we have a freedom to operate problem with lawn navigation, getting to the edge of the lawn and not going into flower beds and cooking the flowers by mistake. That's an IP issue, and IP can be used to hide it or support it or whichever. Vulnerabilities are something more structural. For example, we have these incredible algorithms, but we expect that the next generation of generative AI simply will not need to use any image processing algorithm. It'll just, do it. So we need to have a different type of IP, which is not dependent on that. And the same thing with opportunities. Some lawns have blood-sucking beasts in them, like ticks, and you definitely want your lawn machine to cook ticks as well, and fleas if it can catch them. But you're not doing it yet. Right now, you're only doing weeds. So if it's a future opportunity, you want to use IP to at least maintain a position in this future opportunity. I wanted to give a list of vulnerabilities. It is not a complete list. It's just, what we call things from the last 2 weeks. If your company only has one layer of IP protection, if it looks like it's easy to design around, if there's nobody to sue, if your technology is great, but if a new technology comes along, nobody cares about you. If the competitors have regulatory capture, which means that the regulation is set according to what your competitors want. If in your field, investors don't believe in IP. If you have a two-phase company, and for phase one, you can't get any good IP. What if you have a small group of experts and they're always talking to each other and no way they're going to keep any secrets? Okay, so each one of these problems we're going to solve in a different way. But we should be thinking about them now. The underlying invention is also very unique to each venture. We already talked about how fast is innovation. Maybe your invention won't be needed soon, okay? And Gen AI is a great example of that. Problems, we have solutions, and 2 years later, nobody cares about it. Some technologies are much easier to design around. There might be existing alternatives which might be good enough and they weaken your IP position and mean that competitors can simply ignore what you're doing. What if the technology is easy to copy and then trade secrets and know-how are less valuable? Okay, so a lot of disposable plastic medical device components fall into that group. On the other hand, rocket science does not have these problems. And the other examples of where your invention or technology are simply an issue which affects your IP position. So we did all of this. What's going to happen at the end of day zero? Maybe 2 hour zero. You're not going to have any final answers. You're probably not going to have any decisions. There is no single answer. Rather, you might have some possible directions to explore. It's a bit like scenario planning. You try out several scenarios, none of them is expected to happen, but by defining a few different scenarios, it helps you understand what's going on. You're going to get homework. There's some data you need to supply, things you have to think about, options to consider, and of course, you should definitely set up your first, next meeting. If you met once with an IP person and you understand IP is foundational, don't stop. The founder, you, hopefully your eyes are now open about IP in general and specifically how IP might fit in your venture. You might also have some sort of feeling for what your budget and timetable might look like. And in the positive sense, IP is a coherence activity. It ties together a lot of different things a company does. And that means that if you talk and think about the IP, you're also thinking about your story as a company. Now, you might want to do what I keep on saying not to do, which is to abdicate. Or you're not abdicating, you just decide you're going to tell the patent attorney what to do. Protect this invention, file this. And I'm just recommending to fight these urges and do what's right. Okay, we finished day 0. And now what do we do? Just collect the answers to the questions and, like we're done? Well, not exactly. First of all, the founder needs to understand the major IP issues that they face, both positive and negative. And they need to understand not only what they are, but how they could impact the venture. So when the founder is thinking, what is my venture going to look like? IP is an input. Here it's going to be easier, here it's going to be more difficult, and so on. And like I wrote in the head notes, the most important thing is to start learning how IP is affected by the founder's decision and how it can affect the outcomes, whether you wanted to or not. Till now, I've really only spoken about a company like that weed whacking company, but obviously the company type matters a lot. Let's say we have a business vision, but we have no solution yet. Well, on day 0, we're going to have to start thinking, will we have valuable IP in the future? When will we have it? How will it be created? How do we make sure it's ours? All sorts of landscaping, IP landscaping methods become relevant. It's actually easier to budget if you know what the market looks like and you have a business vision. And it's easier to know who the competitors are, and therefore you know how you might fail, how IP can help, and how much IP you will need. And let's put it like this. I said it at the beginning, that the starting point that you have highlights 2 types of issues. 1, those that you must think about, and 2, those that you can, in the meaning of able to think about. You know enough in order to think about them. In conclusion, yes, I stand behind my belief that you should meet your IP person as early as possible. This is the beginning of a journey, and you don't know the answers and probably don't know the questions, so choose your guide carefully. What is right depends on you, your vision, and so on, but also on the context. IP issues will shape your venture, and in particular, because building a company is usually a process of exploration and IP is part of the landscape, it affects what's easy to explore. What you should be doing is starting early and not stopping, aligning the IP with your business. Wanted to give an example. It's not a joke. A doctor, a lawyer, and computer programmer want to open a bar. What's going to make this bar successful is that they have an AI that tells you a joke, and based on how you laugh, it suggests what you should drink. Is IP important? You know the answer. Yes, it is. But how? How important? Where is it important? What type of IP? How will it help change this new venture? Well, that's what Day Zero meetings are about. I am stopping the recording.